Hello, and welcome to Floating Poly. We're looking to do some texture painting today, but this time we're going to move on to the cloth section of the character that we're doing. The character that we're doing is Sakuya Izuyoi, and she's a character from Toho Project. I've been working on for a good while now, just be about maybe a couple of months. So what we're looking to do in particular with this project when we're going to render in Marmoset is we'd like it to look kind of like an anime figure perhaps. So with that, what I'd like to be able to do is just get some references up to be able to discuss that before, like just to sort of discuss our approach, and then what we'll do is try and sort of replicate that in Marmoset. So let's begin with the first set of references I've got. Now, if you're going to make an anime figure, it'd probably make a lot of sense to look at some anime figures. So I've got a couple here. So this is a figure of Hanamaru from Love Live, and what I want to note is that there is some specularity. Of course, it's made out of, I imagine, PVC plastic or something, and with a PBR setup, what you want to be doing is looking up the value of that material, so the kind of roughness value that a material typically has, and then base your material's roughness from that. And of course you can experiment and divert from that figure, but the actual figure would probably be a good enough starting point, or at the very least you want it to be looking similar enough, right? As I said, there is some level of specular highlighting as a result, and the material is very smooth. On figures, it's just that the character is that smooth. That's why they tend to reflect much more light. If it was actual clothing, it probably wouldn't do that. So that's the thing that you'll need to distinguish over there. Okay, so if we'll just move on to the next reference that we've got, it's the same type of character. This time it's Honoka from Love Live as well. So Honoka then, in this case, she's wearing the outfit from I believe the Snow Halation video, and the thing to bear in mind is that this sort of costume is both white and very rough, so reflections tend not to be seen very visibly there. So okay, with that then, what we have here is two very smooth materials that typically are made of sort of PVC plastic, and a lot of the detailing tends to be defined by things like folds in the cloth. So on the skirts, for instance, you're going to get a lot of occlusion between the folds. So this would be an area where you'll need to consider if you're going to paint in like more ambient occlusion if it doesn't exist there already. If you're going to be painting in some base color, and that's the thing to note on these figurines as well, is that they're not just a single color. When you look quite closely, I think perhaps more at the Hanamaru figure, and if I can configure this to sort of zoom in, I'm not really sure if I can do that. Like if we can just sort of, not like that, sorry. We just sort of scale it up a bit. We'll try to. I'm not sure if you can. Okay. Forgive me because I'm not totally familiar with the software just yet, but what I want to just point out is that on these, the blue is not the same all around. Now you can attribute some of that to shading, but you can definitely see that's the case on, say, the leg, where more reddish paint is being used on the inner thigh, for instance, on the kneecap. That's basically simulating subsurface scattering. Of course, we could just use subsurface scattering for that, so that's fine. But the point being is that across the blues, you're not going to get the same blue on the top side and the bottom side. You can take a torch and light your figurine from different angles and probably find that actually some of it's being manipulated by the paint colors instead. So there's that to bear in mind. And of course, the same is true of the hair. The hair, of course, has gradients in there and some, some basically some like pre-painted lighting to make it all look nice and smooth. Same is true of the face and all that. All right, so with that, what I want to move on to as well is this final reference that we've got, final image reference that I've got. Now, I've been browsing Twitter as of late because I'm trying, like what I've learned is that a lot of Japanese artists tend not to use ArtStation. It's a little bit strange. You'll find a couple, but most of them tend to be on Twitter. So finding this type of artwork means you're going to be trolling Twitter more than you're going to be trolling ArtStation anyway. But this is one I found. The easiest way to just call him is CBK. CKB, my apologies. Let me just very quickly fix that. So sorry. There we go. Anyways, CKB is an artist I've discovered on Twitter, and the most prominent featured artwork on there is this piece on Murasaki Shion, who is a VTuber, who has her own channel, and she basically does the equivalent of, I guess you could say, like Japanese old PewDiePie or something. Basically, someone who plays games and does random things and streams it to YouTube. But the point being that I want to sort of take away here is that the render on the right, has all of these highlights. It's rendered in Keyshot, right? And it looks pretty, pretty good, of course. But when you look at the the like uncolored version on the left, and you see that there is a lot of highlighting going on. So presumably the base of the material actually does play a lot more with light than you'd think it does. Obviously it gets things change when the color is applied, and presumably the textures are changed around, so maybe some roughness is changed, but you can see that there's a lot of form going on in the untextured version. So let's go ahead and move that. So like I say, we want to try and emulate something like that, and if we can quickly find the PBR value of, say, plastic and use that as a base, it wouldn't exactly be hard to work out what that value, like a rough value, might be, because all we're after is a roughness value. And some references on polycount or the physically based rendering encyclopedia should hopefully be good enough to be able to get some decent value, right? So we're just gonna have a bit of a look there. In particular, I think I'm going to link the physically based rendering encyclopedia as well. But it does look like it's got quite a lot of information. I'm sure that many people have already seen it, but just helps a lot with understanding PBR in particular. So they got one for plastic. Just an easy, like, all we want really is just a super general value. Right, okay, fair enough. Maybe I can't find it right now, but what I will show is if I just move this over. Sorry, 1 second. So if we look over here, just for the just sort of the physically based rendering encyclopedia, you get a sort of guide in terms of how roughness travels across. Sorry, how it affects a given material based on whether or not it's metal or non-metal. So if we can use this as a sort of estimation, and oops, sorry, I just realised that it's not quite there. Apologies, it was on the other screen. So if we use this as a estimate, right, where this one is super smooth, like practically polished plastic, and then this thing over here is like matte plastic. We probably want to be somewhere around 0.7, maybe 0.8 levels of roughness, but this depends entirely on what reference we're going to be using. So if we're using this reference, right, so this value does look like there's quite a bit of light. It's just not it's not very concentrated as per, say, value number 0.4 or 0.5 even. So maybe we're somewhere in the ballpark of around 0.6, 0.7, which in fairness, most of these materials already are. But, you know, it's just a case of having a go and experimenting. It may be that they need more roughness, less roughness. Also, with the if this map is called Glossiness, then this essentially means that this is reversed. So in Unreal Engine 4, right, as a value of 0 is going to give you this. A value of 1 is going to give you this. In Marmoset, it's the opposite. So because Marmoset refers to it as glossiness, you have a value of 1 will actually give you this super glossy material, and of course a value of 0 will basically mean that the material is not glossy at all, and thus therefore it's very rough. It's simple. It's as simple as hitting the invert checkbox on Marmoset, so that's not a problem. All right, so now that we've you know, clearly got through that part, let's try and get some substance done. Okay. I want to just switch back over to this view. I want to go to the clothing. I think we want to move on from the hair for a while now. We've done quite a bit on hair, but if I just, oops, anyway, controls back up. And if we can just get the display back on. So in terms of what we did last time, I did a bit more work on it while I was trying to work out how to get the stream to render better. I am hoping that there's going to be less disturbances this time, but with what we see here, it's looking okay. Marmoset was left dormant for a while, and it ran okay when I picked it back up just now, so that seems all right. Anyways, we've got a bunch more like line information going in, so you can see that there's, you know, these sort of dips in the top of the hair there. That's the kind of effect I wanted to achieve. So, and then of course we've done the same for the fringe as well, and then it'll be a case of doing it for the braids and this inner, like this slightly hidden hairbang here, but we're not going to do that today. We're going to move on to the body for now. So if we just position the preview like this, and we can make a little bit of a start. So we're on the clothing. Clothing 1 right now is this lot. Right? Clothing 2 is this, and clothing 3 is the skirt. Now the cool thing is that these materials, these sets have instance materials on. So whenever I go over and make a change to anything blue on here, it's going to reflect on this skirt here as well, unless I have to actually paint in information. But in terms of base information, so like base numbers and stuff, things like that I apply in a certain layer group, which I'll show you, it will reflect across onto the other UV set or the other material. So if we can just quickly find that. Just find that, yep. So it's this thing. Yes, so this folder here is a material instance. Well, it's called a, when you want to instantiate something in Substance so that it can carry across to these different UV sets here, you would right click, and I believe it is instantiate across texture sets, or Control-Shift-D. Now, you could just instantiate a layer, but what I like to do is I like to instantiate an entire folder, and then I can mask that accordingly on the other side. But in this case, if I were to look at the mask, oops, Shift-C, on the mask here, so this mask is applying to certain parts of this because it is applying an ambient occlusion map. So this ambient occlusion map is applying across pretty much the whole of this blue, so including the skirt there, but you don't see it because that's not the UV set that this relates to right now. But when it's instantiated across, right, even though there's no other information in this instance, it still has that ambient occlusion masking on. So you don't have to mask again when you're doing something within the base material instance, so to speak. I understand that might sound a little bit confusing, but what I'm basically getting at is I have a layer here that has some ambient occlusion gradienting on it, right? This is contained within a folder. The folder is instantiated. Because the folder has mask information, this is applied to the other texture sets that it's instantiated to, right? And then on top of this folder, it goes inside another folder, and this folder is what masks this blue to this area so that it doesn't affect the rest of the shirt, the bow, the tights, and everything else, right? So it's basically containing your AO base information, and then you're going to do your other painting on top of that or within that, you know, stuff that you want to apply to everything. And then outside of this instantiated group, you can then apply specific things like, say, paint or other masks or whatever you want. Things that you don't need to travel across. So we want to do as many edits that we can that apply across both texture sets in like simultaneously, and then we can divert into things like painting the textures and stuff. It's generally, like, I think it's easiest to start with the blue. I think that will be the quickest, and then move on to the white. So I just need to adjust my mic a little bit because it's a little bit close. Sorry. I'm hoping that doesn't affect anything too badly. Yep, there we go. It was just that I couldn't quite see my grouping and stuff. It was over my tablet. So, alright, so any changes we want to make here would be good. What we want to try and look at first, it's got a roughness of 94, and then underneath this is the gradient. And I think somewhere here is another layer that defines the actual roughness value, but I'm not seeing it. So I want to have a look. Right, so over here, it's also got a gradient. Yeah. So this gradient is applying on position and basically saying that the color is darker or lighter. I want to check the roughness as well while I'm there. Right, so the roughness is pretty much the same across, apart from over here where an ambient occlusion map is being applied. This ambient, well, obviously it's also over here, but there isn't much ambient occlusion going on here apparently. Right, okay. And then some more roughness going on here. I just want to try and have a play with that. So if I were to decrease this, it basically adds no roughness on. If I just switch over to the roughness channel, yeah, 100%. And if I, yep, okay. And then if I change this one, yeah, we start to see some changes in the way that goes. So what we want is that we want to define the roughness in our gradient, or rather this layer, and then over in this ambient occlusion layer, we then want to either add or take away from it. So for now, we're just going to go over and disable it. And then we're going to start by defining the roughness that we need to try. So we remember that we wanted a figure of around 0.6, 0.7 based on the little chart that we had. So we're going to start with, say, 0.6, I guess, 0.6. So this level of roughness. This is very, I would imagine, very shiny, but you won't know until you see it in engine. And when you look in substance, yep, it's very shiny. So if you had perhaps a different kind of anime figure, right, it might have this level of specularity to it. You know, I can't think of any at the moment that I've got. They're all quite matte, but some of the characters I've got that have more sort of frilly skirts tend to have much more light appearing on the like the main sort of apex of where the frill curves are, because that's just what happens to be where the light gathers the most. So the form of the actual cloth also matters a little bit. So we've got something that looks like this. We're going to go ahead and export the textures. I'm going to swap from hair to clothings 1 and 3, I think, and export that out. And hopefully Marmoset won't cause Streamlabs to drop 1 million frames, but we'll see. Substance is also just saving. We'll let it do that. All right, and we're going to take a look at Marmoset now. Now, Marmoset does seem to have just struggled a little bit, and I consider it is like causing some buffering. So I want to just leave it alone. I want to move the camera in a position first to get it to so that we can actually see the assets, and then I want to leave it alone. Okay, because it does seem like when substance when Marmoset updates the textures, right, in normal working conditions where you're not streaming or anything, then it just loads them up instantly and it's fine. But because I'm streaming at the same time, I believe it may be some, it may be causing some strain on the GPU, and that's why we're getting dropped frames and some lag. So I want to limit my interaction with Substance as much as possible. Sorry, not with Substance, with Marmoset as much as possible, and just get the visible render and see what I'm doing. Right, because I can see that the frames are dropping and you're getting buffering issues. So, all right, just quickly take the apron away and the apron frills away. Over there. Okay, go. Right. All right. So that gives us a clear idea as to what that is going to look like. We can see that there is quite a bit of light, and we could probably afford to go higher. So we're going to go to about 0.7. Okay. 7. All right, so that's exported, and we're gonna just sort of quickly focus on Marmoset and then hit back. Right, just so all we want it to do is update the change. We don't want it to do anything else. See, it's dropping frames. Okay. Look. All right, it's back. All right, sorry. Okay. Just want to make sure that's definitely unconstrained. It is, yes. All right, cool. All right, so that seems a lot softer in Marmoset now. It seems like a fairly good value to start basing things on. It's giving a bit of information, you know, a bit of curvature. It's not completely flat, but at the same time, it's not, you know, like I've just polished it, you know, 6 times or whatever. So now with that, next we move on to our ambient occlusion map over here. And what we want to do even, if it would like to give me my frames back, is that we want to turn it back on normal. Have a look at what that did. All right, so that's given us a sort of a gradient upwards. So everything downwards is receiving more roughness, and everything above it is getting less roughness, so it becomes a bit glossier. Alright. Okay. Would it like to give me my frames back, please? Okay. So as I increase or decrease that opacity on the roughness channel of this layer, I can either add or decrease some roughness in. Now, I need to see what this actual value is before I can make some judgment or decision on it. So I'm just going to sample the layer, and I'm going to look at what this value is. This value is 0.9. We had a value of 0.7, which I figured was agreeable. So this clearly needs to go down. Okay, put it down, sample the layer again. 0.76, okay, just gonna take this AO down here. 0.74, okay, further. Right, so what this layer is doing is purely adding. So if we hit multiply and then start changing it. Okay, it only decreased a little bit, so not quite what I wanted. Going normal, and obviously it's going to add. Perhaps if we go subtract, it might make something more interesting. So because I want some level of variation going on based on ambient occlusion, but I don't want it to be so strong that it changes everything that's going on. The stream's still lagging, even with this. Marmoset is a bit more of a hog than I thought. Right, let me just try closing it and save. A little strange. Try and go and refresh that. I just want to check if it's still, if the stream health is still okay. Apparently not. That is very unfortunate. Boot Marmoset back up. Okay. Oops. What's going on there? I'm not sure. Give me just a second. A little strange. I can't quite get the error message to go away with the because it is telling me that there is basically like a poor quality like stream, which is starting to get slightly more confusing. But if I look at Marmoset, it's loaded fine. If I look at Substance, it's all fine now. So it's a little confusing as to why apparently it's not receiving enough video to do this. It could just be that the error is old or something. I'm not 100% sure why. Okay, I'll just have to continue, I'm afraid. Like, I'll just have to keep looking, but as I tested yesterday, it was fine. So I'm not really sure why it's having such a fit now. Okay. Alright, back to our clothing. Good. Okay. So there's our AO. I'll over look at the roughness values, 7.0 roughly, some increase and decrease, that's fine, that's what we want. Oops. One clothing free, right. Yeah, just have a look at that, 0.6, oh, that would make a lot of sense. Roughness over here, let's on subtract. The only thing is that it is taking away more at the bottom, which I'm not like. So the roughness is decreasing in areas that are occluded, which does not seem to make that much sense, of course. So what we want to do is, if it's on subtract and we're on 1, then what we want to do is try some other method. Maybe we try add, for instance, but we only add a little bit. Of course, the only problem with that is that it's not taking away. I know what we'll do subtract, but this part here, I would hope if we can specifically add an invert purely for this roughness channel. So I've got a filter here. If I swap it over to base color, will it? Yes, it will. All right, fair enough. Close that one. And go and add a filter onto this part. I'm not sure if it's going to work that way, but might as well try. That invert is on, so that's like actually a value of like 0.9 or something, but what I'm hoping is that it will be driven by this mask so that it will take away based on, like, it will take away this number but be based on this mask. So clearly not. We can try and multiply instead. We're still doing that. Result. Try maybe something else. Okay, we've got divide. Just have a look at what's going. Not really what I want. Okay. In which case, inverse divide and look. Okay, that's much better. Well, a little bit better. Not like massively better, but we've got a base of 0.7 here. If we start decreasing this down, and you do see that there's this bit here which is lit more than this bit here, which is what we want, but it's not like massively targeted, shall we say, like, because you can see this bit, even though it's more occluded, is darker than this. Well, let's just see what happens, like, when we start going for it. I mean, it could just be used for variance instead. Okay, so we've got a roughness of 0. Let's put it on 0.5 for our base. And then if we sample what this roughness is around here, we want that to be about 0.7. It's about 0.8 right now. Okay, that's fine. Could probably try buffing it a little. Right, that's 7.4. Alright, brings that roughness down a little bit, about 400-ish below. Have a look at that, 7.0. Okay, that's fine. And then as we get closer to the center, we've got 0.8, 0.7. Okay. And this inverse divide is only buffing it up a little bit. If we look over, say, here, got a roughness of 1. I'm not 100% sure that I would want a roughness of 1 specifically. So we're just going to tone that down a little bit. Look about here, 7.4. Just buffed it, and then look again, 7.4. When I put it on 1, about 7.3, 7.4. Right, okay. .62, buff it up a bit more. 7.1. Alright, okay, cool. So that's a bit more variance going on there, and then this bit is a little bit rougher than this bit. Not by much, mind, but still, it's worth giving that a look. Okay, so we go back to our material view and use substance as an analog for a bit. It may be a case where we're going to have to use substance as a little bit more of an analog, and then when we want to actually see what it looks like in Marmoset, we'll go over and do the changes and hope that it doesn't quite lag so much. And I may have to do more playing around with latency settings and all of that stuff, which is a joy, I'm sure. Okay. And then after that, we can do some painting on the specific parts that we think need that extra definition or guidance, shall we say. Now, you wouldn't want to be doing painting on this instantiated layer because you might accidentally affect the other UV set when you're painting. Because when you look at the UV set, oops, right, so I've got the UV sets on the right, and you're going to see how this area over here is about worth about this much, and then if we switch over to the other one, you see that this area is shared by that, right? So if I were to go over and do some painting on this, but I'm doing it on the instantiated layer, that is gonna reflect on the other texture, much like how the ambient occlusion affects it too. The difference is that with the ambient occlusion, it's picking the correct texture, I think, but if I were to go over and paint on the instantiated layer, I don't think it would play very nicely. So, and even then, you wouldn't be able to access it anyway, because when an instantiated group is put onto the other texture texture set, it will come up as this, but you can see that I can't edit what's inside this because it already exists in this this group here. So I don't want to change or affect that, Alright, so let's get that. So what I want to do is I want to find the layer for a start, apparently. General. Oh. Yeah, that's the shoe. Whoops. Right, go back here. See, that's the folder that we instantiated. So if I want to change things specifically to this shirt, I'm going to have to put all of my changes above this folder. So as you see, it's removed the color and it's applied its own values, so color, roughness, and all of that stuff. In fact, it actually looks kind of like a pre-production figurine to some degree. So we take all that and change that down. If this was like a super polished figurine, then I might expect it to look kind of like that. But of course, that's not what we're after. Right? We're not quite after that. So this roughness value, we're just going to leave at about 9. Right? So if we look at the part that we want to try and change, and we just move the light around, but we've got it on this new roughness, which is replacing it right now, we can see what it's going to look like. Okay? So if I wanted to look around sort of here or here or here, and I'm expecting, very little light to show up, pretty much. And perhaps if I go over and do the same with color as well. So if I change this color to sample from here as a start and then drag it down to about something like this. And then we look over here to this sort of area where all the folds are tucking into the apron. You can see what result that's going to make. And then if I flick back, right, so it's going to look kind of like that. We don't want to play with any height or metal or normals or anything like that. What we want to do is just paint on the roughness and color information. So black mask and paint mask on. And if we just go back over here, and we want to take the other part away because we're already masked on to the blue, so we don't have to worry about any kind of crosstalk whatsoever. He says. Let me just check. Yeah, this should be. It's because the mask is over here. Not. I've gone one too far up, I think. Yeah. There we are. So then we just move that above. If we'd like to. if it would like to. Move it above and then move it out of the blue base layer and into this layer, which is the mask folder. There you are. Right, so there we are. So the mask folder that says everything that's blue goes here. Then all of our changes that we're going to apply specifically to this area, and then this blue base that will apply across this and the other blue instantiated material, which also has its own mask on. So, right, back to our paint layer, and we can be, you know, as frugal or as neat as we want to be. It's not super problematic because it's a mask. We can just change it and edit it as we please. And if we just have a look at what we're doing in terms of just really quickly check that there is no height on there. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, good. And then just paint it on. We don't want to end up with some really strong like hardness like that though. We want it to be quite soft. And the way to do that, and clearly the pen pressure should be on for a start, but we want to paint quite lightly and at very low flow, and if necessary we'll lower the stroke opacity as well. That's another way of getting it quite low. Okay. And we want to use the material view so that we can see exactly what's going on, like in terms of the forms, so that when we're painting our roughness and, you know, shaded combo, we're not confused as to the forms, right? Or maybe where it should go. I'm just going to close the the Marmoset preview for now, since of course it's not going to be run for a good while. Okay. We're painting it so that we can very visibly see that color, and the roughness is on an absurdly high value right now. But 1 second. Yeah, right, so the roughness is on an absurdly high value for now. So we're trying to see that, like, you know, there are definite differences when we paint it on, and then we will adjust the changes afterwards in the fill layer. So that's one of the great things about working with substance, is that it's actually surprisingly non-destructive, and also very open to change. Right? And at any point you can just see what exactly you're doing. You know, you can see where we're painting this mask on, and if we need to change anything or soften anything at all, very, very easily. Okay, so I can see this quite hard in some places. Might turn the flow up. Oops, I'm on the wrong layer. So I'm just going to close up and destroy that bit first. You can see that it's gone on the wrong one. It needs to be on the paint layer. This is a slightly more, just as Substance has many good things, it does also have some things like that. And you don't really want to be painting on this paint layer, because then everything sort of exists on the paint layer over here, and sometimes it doesn't quite recognize it if there's a paint layer underneath it. It doesn't always work. It's not separated. So and everything applies sort of in order in Substance, much like Photoshop. So right, back again. Which way I was going. just gonna try and paint some basically like shadows, I guess you could say. Even though, as I say, it's a PBR, you know, lit material and it has its own forms, it still kind of needs that help. Like I was talking with the figures, you know, the figurines earlier, they also have sort of like pre-painted like soft shadows, because you can't necessarily rely on real life shadowing to make your figurine look good. I mean, obviously physics is a thing, but if you can, you know, add some of your own sort of gradients, it may help to do so. You know, because real life, I guess, is kind of unpredictable like that. So some pre-painted shadows tend to go a long way in making something has more detail than it actually is. But of course, you don't want to go, you know, too hard in there, because then otherwise it only works from that particular lit angle. But it works well for like sort of anime games to some degree. Right, so soften that up. Right. So you can see that it's quite extreme right now, and that's, you know, where we have to come and really change that. It's like, well, the way I see it is work on the mask first and then do your adjustments after. It probably saves you a bit of a headache when you're wondering, you know, why something isn't working, only to find that it's your mask that's trying to overcompensate for the color that you've picked or something like that. You know. Okay. All right. So. You really want that variance going on. And also, whilst it is a game asset, you do kind of want to paint shadows where they exist. This applied much more sort of in the previous gen, like much more, where we didn't have things like proper ambient occlusion and you know, every shadow was pre-painted and such. But there's still a level of applicability where you do need to paint your own shadows. Right? Not so much for things that are lit from many angles, but when you know that something isn't going to be lit very much or even at all, it might help to paint some shadows in there, even if it's just for the actual, you know, variance of it. Unreal, I think, as well, is particularly effective when you have more variance in texture, and the less variance you have, the more you start to see the flaws of the engine. Right? So when you've got like, if you take like a spotlight or a directional light and you just angle it to a particular way, you start to see like all of these visual artifacts, you know. And when you have a realistic mesh, a lot of it, you don't really see these because the variance in the texture kind of hides it a bit. But also, like, the normal map as well helps to have different angles that light can bounce off of, so it's way less artifacty. But when you've got a stylized like mesh like this that doesn't have a normal direction change every like 6 pixels or whatever, you find that the flaws in the engine do become more visible, so you have to do more work in terms of hiding such things. It can be like, you definitely don't want to be using a directional light in such cases. You really want, like, if it's a custom shader, that might be different, but generally speaking, you want to be using spotlights, just because the fall off is what actually helps you there. It's just anything that gives it variance really helps you. Alright, so we got that now. Now if we look at the mask, you can see it's a bit messy, so we just want to clean it up a bit. Okay, so sort of fill in parts that might help to have filled in, and get the flow low and start sort of like softening it a bit. So if this was like more close to Photoshop, what you would do is sample and blend, but because this is not quite going to work that way, you're working more in a 0 to 1 range. What's better in my experience in practicing this is that if you flick between 1 and 0 and set your flow really low and your pen pressure really low, you try and like sort of make that gradient happen and then give it back by pressing X, and you do this a few times and it doesn't always work, but because it's a roughness map, it's not so bad. If it was like base color though, I would probably still stick to like an actual paint layer. And yeah, you're going to run into difficulty, as we have on this stream actually, like one of the previous streams, where you run into difficulty kind of getting a roughness map and a base color map that has been painted in a normal paint layer. You get it difficult to synchronize, but you know, it's probably better to have a good base color layer, which then is aided by a sort of less good roughness map, than trying to like marry the two via fill layers and stuff, because it becomes very limited then. That's why like with fill layers you tend to use like textures more, or effects, or generators, but when it comes to actual like paint work, you probably want to stick to just using the normal fill layer, or you can try using 3D coat, I guess. That also works too, but 3D coat can be a little bit how do I put it, problematic in some ways, and the control scheme, for instance, is not quite as good, I'd say, as Substance. Like Substance has a really great appeal, but at the same time it also missteps badly in terms of like hand painted things. Still though, it's good to do it in Substance because there's just that much control across the other aspects of the program. Like for realistic stuff in particular, it turns jobs that maybe take like days and days of work into mere hours or even minutes sometimes. I'm just going to look over here. Just give this a bit more variance because we don't want it to be super sharp. It's not. We don't want it to be so jarring of a change. We just want it to have reasonable amounts of softness to it. Because after all, it's cloth. I mean, even though we're rendering it like sort of a, I guess, PVC plastic cloth, it's still cloth. Or at least it's trying to be cloth. Okay. Soften that. And lower my flow even more as well, and I'm going to start lowering the stroke opacity as well. This is where you sort of really get into the the limitations of the current paint system. Okay, trying to, this is like stroke opacity really should have been the thing that had pen pressure as well. I don't know why they didn't, but I'm really hoping that with the Adobe changes that they're gonna make it a bit more like Photoshop. Yeah, move my cursor over. Do you sometimes get the issue where Substance like renders your mouse cursor? That's a like, so you see the pointer. That's just happened now, so that can be a little bit weird. Like, it's not like it changes anything. It's just sort of renders the mouse cursor, so it just feels really, really strange. Mm-hmm. Checking if this is in there, right? Yeah, should be. Oops. It wasn't quite in there, I think. At least I think. Blue base. Okay. Mm-hmm. Should be in there, right? I'm just checking that I haven't done something weird. Oh, I know why. Yeah, the reason why I'm getting confused there is because I have it on mask view. So the only problem with mask view is that it doesn't really consider what options or layers you have above it. So you might look at that and think, oh no, I'm accidentally painting over the bow. You're not, because you have masked it. It's just that the program is showing the exact mask shape that you're making. So even though I've got these like paint marks on the bow, it actually doesn't affect the bow at all, because if you look at the roughness area, right, you see that my change is, if I go here, no, apparently, what the hell? Oh yeah, it's because it's really, really low. If I go and change it more. Yeah, so you see how my changes here are affecting this, but they don't affect the bow. Right? Even though I am actually painting on the bow, it doesn't actually change it because of the mask above it. But it can be visually confusing when you change to mask view, right? And you see that you're painting on the bow, right? You think you're making a mistake. You're not. It's just that the mask view shows you exactly what that mask is, which can be, yeah, a little confusing. But just remember where you've masked. That's all. Right, back to really low flow, and just sort of, we're just gonna smooth the masks out. And if we look on our material view, just sort of move our light around, we can see the parts where we have changed the affected part. And if we go over and throw it on like some crazy color, just so that we can see where we're painting, and you can see pretty clearly that yes, it is being painted on, the roughness is being changed. So could just undo, that might make it easier. So I'll just continue on just smoothing the part out over here, right? And also to paint on some more. Do that. So now flow back up a little, and just do that. I'm going to do something where I turn it to free rotation, because this is a part where it might benefit me to rotate the screen. Now, I could physically rotate my tablet, but that is not great for space. So I'm just rotating the view by changing this to free rotation. Right? And now I can sort of paint it a little bit easier. Okay, so we just painted a little bit of a base value. Now we're just going to go ahead and smooth that out so it becomes a bit more of a gradient. Smooth it. Put a little bit in there. Smooth again. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just enough to be able to, you know, become like to show that the value is changing, right? Gradually. It doesn't have to be like super perfect. I'll just give it back over there to see what I'm doing. Right. And one thing that I like to do as well, I think that helps, is that if I increase the brush size but decrease the pressure, either by simply drawing lighter or affecting the flow, what I'm doing, and I just sort of go over it a few times, is trying to introduce a sort of gradient into my like roughness map there. Okay, so, and obviously I would have it on the lowest possible hardness, so I am essentially softening the area, okay, but with really low opacity and going over it a few times on a fairly sort of big brush, but small amounts that it adds on. Okay. So I guess that might be soft enough for now. And I'm just going to go ahead and flick that to roughness, and you can see that you've got more roughness underneath and in these sort of like crevicey areas, right? And then less roughness above them. You can always correct any of it if you so choose. So I'm just adding some more here and over here where the plane like faces upwards. And anywhere where the planes sort of face more downwards or are, you know, occluded, I'm just going to throw on a bit. All right. There's that. Let's have a look at how that's doing. Okay, it does okay. So now we can edit the color and the roughness value that we have on here. So let's move that here and just have a go at playing around. So if I were to lower it to 0, you see how it becomes immediately much more shiny over there at the bottom, but we don't want that. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave it at about 0.9 perhaps. 0.9. Okay. And then for our color, I'm just going to have to play around a bit. So let's go and get the base color. Okay. I'll just turn that off for a sec. Okay. I'm going to sample around here. Alright, so that's like if we didn't have one, perhaps. Well, not exactly, but it's like if it was the same color as the thing above it. And now we're just going to sort of start choosing a color that is, you know, going to fit well, and what you would expect basically to paint underneath there, right? Basically to paint in shadows and occlusion and stuff, right? Right, and then go back to the paint layer. Just adjust a little bit. So I'm adjusting this after I have changed the color, right? But the thing is that I didn't, you know, I didn't adjust my mask before. Sorry, after. Sorry, no. Let me try this again. Sorry. I painted my mask first after I'd already established a fairly easy to see color so that I can see what my mask is doing. Then I change my parameter, so you know, the color and the roughness to things that I think are going to work. Then I can do some final adjustments on the like the mask, right, so that I can further tweak it. Yeah, that I think is the order to go in, which I know sounds pretty long-winded and confusing, so I do apologize. But we might be getting somewhere now. Go ahead and soften that some more. Soften that. So even though this is only base color, it's getting a, you know, a really like big amount of shadowing in there, right? Maybe even too much to a degree. Okay. And buff it some more. Right. I'm just flicking back and forth between my material view and the base color view, much like I would do with the hair painting and such. Right, so even with a base layer, that seems to, you know, say a lot of things. Right, so it's, you know, it's suggesting a level of depth. And of course we can, you know, just like decrease the opacity of this as well if we want to suggest less. Sorry. Yes, I think we would. Yeah. Oh, it's on roughness, that's why I couldn't see it. There we go. Now, there we go. So if it was too much, we can just, you know, lower it, so not a problem. Just try and go in that order, you know, from like start to finish, right? Like, make sure the mask is painted first, then do your paint, like your softening, and make sure that the value was already set to an extreme first, and then you can tweak that value afterwards. Alright, so let's have a look at that. Okay. Alright, so I think we've reached a point where we can think about importing into Marmoset. And this is the part where I really hope that it doesn't, you know, like lag the stream really, really badly. Oh dear. So, alright, let's see. Yep, even stepping into Marmoset has initiated a fight. Alright, can we do some things to try and make it a little like easier on it? Anti-Aliasing, definitely want that off. I would like to do it. There we go. Making that internal refraction. Right. Oof. Please, Marmoset. Please don't. Once it gonna load. Once. No. Okay. Let's try restarting Marmoset. You can't see what I'm doing on it right now, but you will be able to hopefully in a moment. Okay. And what I'm going to try and do as well, actually, I'm restarting Marmoset, but what I'm going to do is that I'm going to export the textures first, so that then it has no choice but to load those textures in. Right? Because it seems like when it's, if the program's already open and then it loads textures in while I'm streaming, it lags. So, you know, maybe we can like trick it. Okay, so there we go. Alright, so now it's loading up. And buffering. That's unfortunate. But the textures are loaded. Okay. Alright. Don't want to move the camera too much while I'm doing that, because I know that it will buffer if I do that. So I'll just leave it at that. Now, I think that this value that I've given it in terms of color is too dark. Like, I can see like it's sort of black. And I think that I can either do one of two things. I can either change this color, or I can reduce the opacity. And I need to do one or then the other, and not both at the same time. So, because otherwise then it becomes very difficult to, you know, map what you're sort of doing, I guess. So if we switch over to base, right, and you know you want this to be quite subtle anyway, so we're just going to go over and tap disable on that, right, so we can see what it looks like normally. Then we're going to go over and sample this color. Just sample that. All right. Now we're going to put it on normal. All right. So this is like not quite if we had nothing, but it's still quite, you know, low. Now we're just going to drag that over and make it something like that. Oh, no, not like that. Ah, it's because Windows Ink. So the one thing you need to bear in mind, if you're painting in Substance Painter and you want pen pressure, you need Windows Ink. Right? So Windows Ink has to be enabled for this particular program. You can do this, assuming that you're on a Wacom and not a Huion or something like that, right? In your Wacom settings here, I've got a Cintiq, but the same applies to an Inchios. You would have to add Substance Painter as a application for it, and then I believe it is in options or default, or one of these two. No, not default, but calibrate. Yes, in calibrate over here, you see this tick box that says use Windows Ink. So if you're actually painting with pressure in Substance Painter, you need this on. But the problem that this has is that Windows Ink will interfere with a lot of things. You know, we've had a comical situation with inputting text in the like with naming layers and other things like that, and that's kind of funny when you want to write in your you know, your names, even though you could type it like 10 times faster. But where it really becomes a problem is in color picking. So sometimes you might find, like, I'm gonna go over and put the color around here. You can see my cursor. I let go sometimes, and it might like jump somewhere. Not all the time, but sometimes it will jump. No idea why, but you may find that you're trying to pick a very exact color and it doesn't quite work, right? So just bear that in mind when you want to use Substance Painter 2019.3 and above. Maybe they'll fix it in 2020, I don't know, but until then, you know, have fun, of course, writing in your layer names. You know, so if we want to call this a fun layer, perhaps we'll call it, let's say, cloth paint, right? I am surprised that it managed that. I am truly surprised, but, you know, yeah, it's not something that you'd actually want to do, but it's there. Like, I don't know, maybe like the developer of Substance realized that he wasn't able to reach the keyboard when he had his tablet in front of him, so he decided to incorporate Windows Ink to do that. I don't know, but hopefully it's something that they'll fix when Adobe comes along. You know, I am. It is very strange to be hopeful for Adobe to fix something. I know, right? Like I'm sure the amount of people that were very annoyed when they learned that Substance was being bought, and of course have review bombed the Steam page. You know, I'm sure that they were, you know, they're absolutely, you know, not thrilled. So we're going to do the same over for the skirt here, and there's not going to be very much to do, because of course most of this is pretty simple. We're just going to throw our instance over into its own folder. The folder will then have a black mask on, and because it doesn't have any other actually, yeah, it doesn't have any other geometry that affects it. So actually, yes, that's why it doesn't have any other grouping. Sorry about that. but that's because I know that because I've UV mapped this thing in particular to be on its own. But if it had other components with it, I would put it in its own group and then mask it with the color selection tool. But for now, because it doesn't need that, that's fine. So now I could go over and just make everything again, and that would be real fine and dandy if I had 6 hours to do that, but I don't have that much time. So the easiest way is to go back to our color, like our previous material where we made that cloth paint. We're just going to copy it. Thankfully, your same shortcuts, of course, still work. So, of course, we're going to Control-C, Control-V, and you see that it applies. But, of course, you're still going to need to remove the old paint layer and put in your new one. And there we have that. So, we don't have to change any of these values anymore. And it's just a case of painting pure and simple. And if we just move over to there, to the base color view, and you can see what I want to do is I want to get the in-betweens on the skirt here where it's occluded. Now you can argue as well that actually if it was a simulated skirt, these may not always exist. You'd be right. So like if it's flowing around or doing other things, of course the light is going to be affected differently. But at the same time, I want to make the argument of variance and, you know, that it's not going to be the same color throughout. So I'm just going to get rid of that. It's just in the way a little bit. Now, this skirt is not completely, well, it is 100% symmetrical from a geometry point of view, but it is not symmetrical from a UV point of view, which is why you see that I'm doing things twice. Now, we could go right ahead and add symmetry, and that will fix, you know, a number of things there, but it might be nice to have some asymmetry in the texture painting as well. We're just going, but for the base level, yeah, sure, start symmetrical and then introduce your asymmetry after. Yeah, so we go back into our view here. And we see that we're getting, you know, a bit of darkness in between the folds, so to speak. But, you know, much like with everything else, I want to make it a smooth change. I don't want it to be too dark or too bright. So go back to our mask view and do the exact same thing as we have been before, which is to basically paint out over, give it lower stroke opacity, lower flow, and apply very light pressure. We just want to, you know, sort of feather it, right? Big brush with lots of, like, a very, very soft brush. Go ahead and do that to the bottom as well. Okay, so the bottom is a little rougher than the top. Some added variance, and of course for you know, just basically to say that light doesn't catch as much on the bottom. You can also argue that like lights can come from different directions. That's fine. It's like we're not saying that something is 100% going to be affected or not. What we're saying is that because it's on the bottom, it is simply affected more or less. You know, we're not completely killing that answer 100%, if that makes sense. Now, we're having some slight interesting... yeah, because it had 0 value. That's fine, that's fine. I thought that it was because I had hit the wrong... the wrong UV. It's fine. Incidentally, like, it's taking... Sometimes you have to, like, increase your flow and decrease your flow when there is a lot of difference. So, for instance, because when I'm hitting X and it's just jumping to 1, 1 is a lot bigger than the numbers that I had painted on, so it creates a lot more contrast, which you may or may not want. So, you know, when I'm trying to take away, I have to put a lot more effort when it's flipped like that. Right, which is why I'm having to increase the flow so much. But then when I flick back to, you know, painting on, I then have to reduce my flow or, you know, press very, very lightly because of the sheer difference in terms of the number that I'm applying on. Let's say still a little more. It might also be because, you know, stroke opacity and all that. Okay. But when stroke opacity tends to be quite high, it tends to also make things quite difficult, which is why we really, really want stroke opacity to be a pen pressure affectable, you know, parameter. Right. The inside as well is also a point of contention as well, but and you can see that there's no mask on this for the inside, but at the same time it's the inside. You're not really going to see it that much unless, of course, you know, you're doing some interesting types of shot, in which case go right ahead and paint the roughness in there. But for this one, we're probably not going to pay too much attention to the inside. We'll do it kind of roughly. Okay? But our full-on attention is definitely going towards this outside part. Yeah, okay, so let's see how we're doing. Alright, okay, cool. We get some variance, we get some interesting changes. And of course we've got the roughness in between the folds there. And if we go back to base color, we can even, you know, paint with this view as well if it makes things easier. You know, because sometimes that can be a little bit easier to tell than, you know, just like a straight up black and white texture map. Right? It might even need more. It might need more sort of like varying values and stuff. But for now, it's the most that we really need there. Just enough to be able to describe that the parts that are not occluded or, like, you know, together, like closely together, are affected more by light than the other parts around it. All right. I'm also thinking that my issues with Marmoset doing this sort of while I'm streaming may be down to graphics card. It's only a 1070 in there, and I swapped the Streamlabs settings to use CPU-based things, so software encoding, which seems to have improved a lot of things. But since it's still an ongoing issue, it's still something that I'm going to have to look into and find out. So, you know, so do apologise. You just have to bear with me as I work my way through it. Alright, so the other thing with this is that she's wearing an apron above this this area. Now, it's not like we have to paint that area in with this particular map. And it might very well be a decision that we backtrack on and go, oh, actually, the apron already does a lot, And if the apron moves as well, you know, you get even more problems, because of course, you know, now you've gone and painted this whole like ambient occlusion-y area or variance area, and you know, now you've realized that the cloth, that particular cloth, can move, and suddenly, you know, your error is visible to the world. So how to do this simply enough is to simply add another paint layer on. Of course, then you'll just have to make sure that you actually do paint on this paint layer and don't accidentally paint on the wrong layer, which is unfortunate, but I mean, it is avoidable, but that would involve making a whole new layer and such, and you know, this is the easy way. The easy way of going about it is to simply add it on as a new little paint layer, paint mask thing. So what we want then is that we want to suggest that everything underneath this cloth gets less light. And I don't think that this cloth is going to move. And if it does, it won't be difficult to remove this, you know, this extra layer. We'll just hide it and then export again. Right? So non-destructive editing. It's a win. Take the thing out, and we've got it on the new layer. So we just literally paint in where that apron was. Oops. And that apron is around here. So we just literally paint that area roughly, right? But soft. Roughly but soft, right? Like I say, it doesn't have to be like 100% perfect. It just needs to encompass it enough so that it, you know, the frills and stuff do actually reach there. Now, if you wanted to actually change the color, that would be more difficult, and it would need to be on its own layer, right? So like if it was somehow a shiny enough material to warrant like you painting on different colors there, you'd have to actually do that as a new layer. But for now, in our simple way, we can just simply increase the roughness by painting on this new paint layer mask. Right? So we've basically gone full bore on that particular area where we think that the apron is. Okay, so there we are. There we are. Okay. Simple enough. Now, I discussed the insides like briefly, and we do want to try and see what we can do with them. After all, it should still have a high amount of roughness. We'll just look at it first and determine whether or not it's worth editing. Okay, so I'm just going to make a new layer just so that I can sample. I'm going to sample this color first. So this is, sorry, this color first. So this would be light hitting the most visible part of the skirt, I guess, right? So that's about 0.69, so 7, right? 0.7, a value that we understand. Then we're going to go over and hit that, and it's about 0.7 as well. So if light, for whatever reason, were to hit from underneath, we would expect it to behave in exactly the same way based on these values. If it was hitting from underneath and like upwards, as opposed to, you know, on the outside. Realistic, yes, but is it the effect that you want? After all, stylization is not about what happens in real life, it's about what you want to happen and what you intend to happen. So in this case, it's not like a super difficult change or anything, right? So what we've got here, we've got it called cloth paint, right? And it'll just, this is just the outside. So what if maybe we want to go like just basically say that it is definitely outside. Oh, here we go again, right? Can it recognize this? Oh yes, apparently so. Cloth outside paint, right? It's not a great name, but still. And we're just gonna quickly duplicate it. All right, there you go. Let's do it again, shall we? So, I don't know how to clear. How do you clear it? Oh. Well, I still have to, you know, reach over for my keyboard, but it is behind my tablet, so, you know, there we go. And we'll go sort of inner cloth. Wait, what the hell was that? What is that? Free look. All right, okay, we're in 1999. No, not even 1999. 1996. Quake 1 has been released, and you have a mouse. Free look is available. Freaking hell. Right. Cloth inner. Thank you for. There you go. Alright, there you go. Alright, so kill that, kill that. Alright, so we've got all of our normal values and stuff. But this time we want to target the inner cloth specifically. Now, first things first, we'll just add a color selection. I believe there is an ID mask on here. Yep. Making an ID mask is not difficult, but, or rather, should I say, baking an ID mask is not difficult. Understanding an ID mask so that it actually bakes what you want it to bake, more difficult. Typically, you would want to bake one for your UV set, sorry, your UV islands and like objects. I think object based ID maps, right? So that every separate object in a given mesh, so long as it is actually an object, it will render out as a different color. It can get a little bit crazy sometimes, but if you end up merging everything together, then that becomes one object, right? So like if you had a shoe and you have in that obviously the base of the shoe, like the heel, the sole, the shell around it that basically wraps around someone's foot, and then laces, right? You should probably keep these elements separate so that when you go to project, all of these elements will then become different colors on your final mesh. If you merge them together, what you then get is a giant, you know, single color shoe that you now can't use. We can go through this some other time, of course, but you know, just to sort of bear in mind, like that's how much of an understanding you need in terms of baking ID maps and object maps and stuff. So if at any point you want some kind of demo, I'm free to do it. But it would require, I would have to like record it rather than do it live, because it's obviously I would have to open Marmoset to be able to demonstrate that kind of thing. So, and of course, as we know, Marmoset does not like OBS very much here. So, okay, rant over. So we've got our color selection. We just hit color. Oh look, inside, because I've got it on, I baked a UV set. I just simply pick the other UV, and that limits it to what is the inner skirt, and very easily I can tell, oh look, it's this one. And it's got its mask on, so I don't want to change anything. Like when I've got this color selection on, this should be the final mask that encapsulates everything. Easiest way to do that, throw it in a folder, copy the mask over there, add a black mask, paste the mask in. There you go. And then now that that's done, we can close that bit, and so now everything is contained within that mask. And now we can go ahead and do our painting. Okay, so add the mask back in, add a paint mask. And this one we don't need to be so super careful about. We just need to know where the dips are. And in this case, it's pretty much the opposite, right? So where over here our roughness was lower, and then in the bit here our roughness was higher, it would be the opposite. So the bit over here is going to have a lower roughness, and the bit over here is going to have a higher roughness. But these values are still going to be higher than our lowest value and then our highest value here, right? If that makes sense. In other words, we are still saying that this area here does not really contain that much, like it doesn't allow that much light. But so in other words, you're not going to get like crazy specular highlights happening on the inside of the skirt, but you know, it still behaves according to the shape of the skirt, right? I hope that made sense. So we've got our thing here. At the current moment, this roughness is painting 0.9, I guess so. But what we can also do, since we've already masked it, is put on a base paint fill layer, put it underneath this, since that'll be driven by a mask. We can keep a color value in there, actually. What we can do with that is just simply hide it first. Oh, no, don't hide it. Do that. And then switch to base color, just so that we can see a little easier. And then just pick, like, this color, right? So this shade of color about here, right? And then turn it down. We'd like to. Oh, yeah, there you go. So that we can see it. It's already pretty far down. It's alright. Cool. And our roughness, we're just going to turn up, but we need to see what we actually have, because we can't really make much of a judgment unless we actually know what the number is. Alright, so we want it to be higher, maybe not quite this high, but we want it to be definitely higher than this. So grab a new paint layer. It's just so that we can see the value. Look at this value. It's about 0.67, right? And the current value that we've got is 0.7. So if we can just increase this to 0.83 perhaps, and then look at it again, 0.83. Brilliant. Okay, cool. We can delete that layer now. Yeah, I'm just gonna flick the light around. Yeah, so you can see that it just sort of throws that light around. And we can just, where's our, this one? Paint layer. And go to like the normal view, like about here. Value of 1. Just look at the mask as well. Yep, it's on. I'm just gonna start throwing on the color and then soften it after. So throw it on, because you won't be able to see much difference going on. Like if you just paint like this, you can't see it. No, not easily anyway. Right, so if I go over and do that and then undo, even if I go over and increase my flow, right, you can barely tell what difference that made. So going in the mask view can help you out a bit there, so you can actually see what you're doing. Right. Even though it's only going to be a subtle effect anyway, so it's not going to, you know, it's not exactly something that we need to spend forever on and you know, getting perfectly right, because, you know, like I say, who's going, like, are you going to show the like this kind of shot, so to speak? If not, then probably don't need to put too much into it. Just so this view, right, like, so like if it was an upward view like this, is just so that we can tell that things are going on there. It's not, you know, so going to be so perfectly rendered or anything, right? Basically focus on the parts that you're going to actually see and that you actually intend to show. Unless, of course, you intend to show that, in which case you carry on, sir. Or madam. Okay, so... Right, and I've got symmetry on as well. Like, you know, as I say, there's no point wasting too much time going like and making something completely asymmetrical in a part where you can't see it. You know, we're only doing the necessary. Okay, so there you are. I want to increase the roughness over at the top sort of side, so, and as it goes down, then, you know, where it becomes more visible, that's where your changes actually occur. Okay, so there you go. Now we'll just go back to our normal view and just see. Okay. Alright, and let's see if we can get some difference going on if we change values here. And you do, to a degree. If you go brighter, yeah, you absolutely do. But if you go darker, not so much. And if I were to go here as well, just to check, yeah, it's the exact same. Because the light is quite wide, the only thing we're really determining is the amount of like highlight this gets, right? And the most that this highlights is just this really, it's like hard to see sort of effect here, because we've got a very dark color going on in the you know, the base color. Right, so base color does affect how much light gets thrown around. Okay, so then when we look at base color as well, just to see, yeah. Okay, and we'll load that up as well. Right, and compared to what we had before, this is very different, right? And hopefully, like, you know, this sort of painted gradient and such is going to help out a lot in the rendering. Okay, so we've basically just done most of this blue color today. So I guess the final adventure is to attempt to load it in Marmoset, like export and see what happens. So hopefully Marmoset isn't going to throw too much of a fit, but as we've determined in the last few times, that has become the adventure of the stream right now. So we've got that. We're going to go ahead and load. Right, and immediately we see that there is a decrease in the amount of saturation, or at least I hope you can hear me when I say this. There is a decrease in the amount of saturation where we determined that the apron was, right? So, see already that the connection is suffering for it. Let's just quickly get out of that. And try and hopefully it'll come back. Right, move this maybe. Yeah, as soon as I interact with Marmoset, you get into buffering issues. I may need to play with some stream settings just to like, since I think that I don't necessarily need it to be like super real time anyway. We can go from using the ultra fast mode to the slightly slower mode, which puts us about, I think, 10-20 seconds behind. So it's not quite as interactive, but you know, like it might be better off for it. You know, even if we're 20 seconds behind, I can still answer your seconds and you'll just be answered 15 seconds slower. So hopefully that will help a bit more. And but at the end of the day, if Marmoset takes that many resources, there's not a lot I can really do about it other than, you know, well, you know, hope that it doesn't eat the resources, really. And occasionally, like, we can come back and forth and look. Yeah, the effect is it's okay. It looks more like cloth anyway. What's really going to be interesting though is when we try this on the shirt, and I find that like color contrasts in the shirt are going to be the hardest because it's really difficult for me, I find, to paint white like colors, right? Because you've already reached the brightest color, and then you have to sort of darken it. And what hue do you go? What shapes do you color in? All that stuff. But hopefully, it will be something that we can. Hopefully, it will be something that we can work out. Yeah, I do see the buffering on the. I do see the buffering issues that are caused by Marmoset. Like, I don't know if it's like a memory leak or something, where Marmoset goes and just has a bit of a struggle. So let me try restarting it. This will be the final time we're like loading it. But it will already have its textures loaded in. Right, let's just check for latency. Yeah, okay, we're good. Alright, so I'm going to try loading Marmoset. Yeah, I don't know what it is, I'm afraid. Marmoset doesn't even appear to take that much memory, but clearly it has a struggle with something. Right. Right. Well, what we can do at the current moment in time is basically say that's what the model looks like now after we've done our painting. So I'm hoping that you can see it, but I think it's very different to what we had before. So, and we can see the variance in the color and how the roughness changes the way that the material is perceived. So the only things, I guess, after this point is to look at our references again and determine, do we need to do more? So if we look at, say, maybe this one, like we can use this as reference for the whiter materials. Most of this, of course, is going to be done by the engine itself. It's going to render a lot of these shadows already, right? And of course, they're all the same type of like plastic, so most of it is going to be handled by the engine, and the only things we really need to do is the actual base painting. And if there's an area that needs more roughness, just give it more roughness, really. Same's true of this Hanamaru piece. This blue part in particular has been very helpful to decide what kind of if like specularity level we were going for. So yeah. And then do we need things like, I don't know, seams? Do we need a visible seam? I don't think so. I think like keeping the mesh as simple as possible will probably help out. So yeah, just painting the it's the thing about these is that they're also already posed, so they also know exactly where they want to apply things like extra shading or extra occlusion or whatever. We're not doing that because I want to try and make it more dynamic, right? If it was animatable or something. So yeah, those are just the considerations that we've got. And then of course finally we have CKB's work on Shion there. It's just absolutely gorgeous. But yeah, If we can try and emulate maybe something like that, it may be a case where, you know, maybe we do want some more specularity on, you know, the different cloth and such, just for the effect. But I think that we've got a good amount of specularity on the blue already. You know, the most that we could probably do is like maybe even tone it down just to get some tighter highlights. But yeah, that's essentially it for today. We've done quite a bit of painting, and you know, even though it's all, most of this was just parameter based, it was ultimately, you know, still painting, right, and blending. And so I'm hoping that I'll be able to teach you a little bit in this stream as well. So thank you very much for watching, whether you've been watching live or if you're watching in post. If you've got any questions, do feel free to leave it in comments. And of course, please feel free to subscribe if, of course, this has helped you. Any questions, of course, I will be free to answer. So until tomorrow at 4:30, I hope that we meet again. Thank you so much and goodbye.